Hello there, people of the earth. Welcome to the Front Page Fables. Today I have some pro-revenge stories, so sit back and relax, but before. Threaten my friend with revenge porn? I'll ruin your whole damn life. My very good friend made some slightly dumb mistakes and sent some pictures to someone that she reasonably thought she could trust, but not knowing much more than his first name, his screen name, and roughly where he lived and the type of work he did. He is not in our country, but had indicated that he would be traveling for work to near us shortly, and they had made some plans to meet. And when she got some red flags and backed out, the dude threatened to publish these pictures online. I am, incidentally, an attorney. So, some searching later, and gathering up any pictures he sent her of him that could possibly identify him. His online handle led me to a TikTok page, which led me to an Instagram page with his name on it. That led to a LinkedIn page with his place of work that matched a picture he sent with a branded polo he was wearing. Some more searched got me the email of the CEO, VP of HR, Operations Manager, and Public Relations Manager. I just fired off an email on behalf of my client of the screenshots of him threatening revenge porn, snippets of the conversation showing that username while he sent that exact picture of him wearing his company's branded apparel, links to how I know it's him, along with pictures he sent her of his motorcycle with the license plate showing, as further proof it is him. I also included screenshots of him discussing a workplace incident that were time-stamped, along with pieces of dialogue discussing how he had sex with an ex at his place of work, and discussing plans to have sex with her in his office as well. I also included a picture he sent her showing his work laptop with his entire Outlook calendar, along with proprietary information which he sent to prove he was busy, along with other pictures he took of his workplace with non-consenting employees. I further informed his employer that I will be forwarding all this information to local to them law enforcement, and since he had indicated that he would be traveling to the United States soon, will also forward this to the local office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation as, since my client is a US citizen on US soil, these threats constituted a federal crime. So that should they continue with his employment, and continue with their plans to send him to the United States for work, I will ensure, on behalf of my client, that federal law enforcement is waiting for him on arrival. Which I will do, as one of the assistant S attorneys for this region is a law school buddy of mine. Since I have his license plate hash, I know where he lives, and will be contacting his local authorities tomorrow. You dumb mother lover thinking you were hiding around anonymity, thinking you could threaten my friend. It took me 45 minutes to destroy your life. I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life 20 plus years ago, and I just made sure it stayed ruined. Sorry, this is a bit long. All names changed. Throwaway account for all the reasons. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake, then M23 through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move to the opposite side of the United States for grad school, and I had already been making plans to move with friends only a 90-minute drive away from where he was moving to. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate. Both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun. Went for taco dates and spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling small animals. Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Mary, mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She is a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Jake was a teaching assistant, and I met other people in the program and made friends with them faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, laying in bed together, in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, he was concerned I'd been gaining weight, and it made it harder for him to be attracted to me. No concern about my health, it was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there is better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends. Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of BS. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier, and still wore the same size clothes, about a size 6'8". I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it after all. It was his problem, not mine. So I asked him calmly, "So what is your solution to this?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight." And I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that, so what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I guess nothing. I wanted to let you know how I feel." And I said, "Cool, thank you." Put my clothes back on, went to sleep, and drove home the next day as usual. We keep dating, and about 3 months later he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work where he didn't have to use common names for animals instead of scientific ones. I said, "Well, that's bullshit. What's the real reason?" He said it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the real reason. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students. Let's call her Meg, a 19-year-old. He was then 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave. My roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Meg a few times, and at one point, she was at his house for a BBQ and spilled something all over her pants. Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats. I couldn't because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward. He clearly liked a big gal. Although, when he'd said those things to me about my weight, it was 1 a.m. I lived about 95 miles away, and we had just had sex, so I don't know how he thought this would go. Even in hindsight, it perplexes me. Did he think I was going to break up with him and storm off into the night and drive for an hour and a half? Anyway, I emailed his roommates. It was the early 2000s. It's how you communicated anything you didn't want to say on the phone. I wanted to let them know we'd broken up and that they were always lovely to me and thank them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Meg and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame, "You don't understand science" excuse. One of his roommate, a super nice, super cute guy named George, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me away from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend. We go out and drink and have a good time. All the things Jake didn't want to waste money on, and I said sure. So I went up and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it. It was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $1.25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal, not allowed in the state, which was in a tank, right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman, but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said have fun with my leftovers and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud, hook up, and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day I had my photos developed, the good old days, and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have at all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program, or by his roommates, but I was. George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that Ata was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him, and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later George called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened and told the officials as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state under nearly any circumstances, animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate in the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet. It was a good day. The only animals they left was some guppies in a fish tank. Now, PhD students need grant money to do research, and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Jake had just gotten an EPA grant right around when he broke up with me. So I called the EP and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant was being investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his EPA grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used. Close to $30,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding animals worth thousands of dollars since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the 2 illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine, and the 2 animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Meg and was so stupidly self-assured he didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was attending. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I emailed his sisters and told them I missed them because Jake broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them emails that Jake wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Meg and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically, and it made him attracted to Meg. Jake managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a PhD, and while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother via email and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even, made some friends. Mary became like an auntie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself and my specialty, helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to lay people. You know, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names. I swear, it happened by accident. Not design, but I love it, and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids. Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Jake went back to breeding animals. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over for lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings still were my friend and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife, Meg. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Jake's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended, 10 years after we broke up. Jake never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing, except maybe exaggerating a drunken makeout session with George, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 20 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and grad students. In the end, I was mingling with the student afterwards, and I hear a voice say, "Hey up, long time no see," and I realize it's Jake, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked, and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Jake," and I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake." I guess I blocked you out and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there, with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in a science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner, and while there, one of them said, "So you know Jake?" I said, "I did from over 20 years ago," being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it. I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry. I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said what happened, and I said, "He was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26, and he had to leave the program without a PhD because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship." The three people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that," and changed the subject. My old friend Mary, retired a year or two now, but still friendly with her old collages, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Jake, and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree, and the complaint letters from over 20 years ago about his conduct. Mary's name had been on it with her husband listed as the faculty advisor, so she thought she'd like to know. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad had paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced, and he paid the fines so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's gonna get that job. So I will return to my life, content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there is anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now size 10 pants, it's that, if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours, and maybe it's time to check out what they are doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Jake hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself. Say goodbye to your house and your retirement. This one is not technically my revenge, but some revenge I got to see up close and take joy from, and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a little long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed on the submarine base in Connecticut. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our school Navy job training. We'll call that friend Bill. Now, Bill wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Bill was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers that were hard asses. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Bill often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Bill did pass the minimum requirements for fitness. He just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the McPon coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day he visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Bill. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself, you name it. They were always on his ass despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Bill pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doc on base. The doc had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. So Bill kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't get mental health services, really. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor priest rabbi that is signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain, she held the rank of captain high-ranking officer. So Bill set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Bill informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a pussy, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Bill he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day, so he canceled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Bill. I couldn't hear anything and I asked several times, "Bill, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Bill had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually I figured it was a butt dial drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Bill's, now ex-girlfriend, informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. Turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Bill couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Bill would be okay, and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Bill, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the M's to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about 1 millimeter. A week went by, and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by the chief of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of, and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass-chewing he gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys, and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple other examples of their own, with these guys being generally shitty, dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed, and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day they were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Bill before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Bill's attempt. So on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to the admiral in charge of the entire base and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under the table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DOD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country. Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't, and they don't want it anyway. So I don't know where these guys went or what become of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. One of them had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. The other was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Bill, well, he made a full recovery. He got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a police officer, and got married. Edit to add. For those who have pointed it out, their discharges were actually off, but I didn't want to have to explain the difference or have people Google it. We always use dishonorable colloquially for offity because they all mean you got the boot and your life is gonna suck. But no, they didn't do full CM or any brig time, but I did hear they pushed it to ASB and lost. Also saw someone pointed out Bill wouldn't get the medical at 100% for his neck. That's also true, he wouldn't have, but they wrote it up for his knee because it was basically bone on bone inside. I think they decided to do him a favor and not put him down as a mental health discharge. Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We use that to our advantage. Here I am, writing this long tale in my honeymoon, but it does feel cathartic to finally type it out. And my husband is more excited about this than the resort drinks, lol anyway. This is a throwaway because I don't have a Reddit account and my husband, the Reddit fanatic, said he doesn't want this associated with his main. As to why the Reddit guy isn't the one writing this, it's because he said, since it's my family, I should be the one with the honor of posting the story. But he is looking over my shoulder to help out. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if this works, but I do not give permission for this to be reposted anywhere else. So, I think first it's necessary to give some background to explain how this behavior reached this level and why our responses were as they were. It's a long read, I apologize. So, ever since I could remember, my parents loved my sister more. I don't mean in subtle ways either. If my sister accused me of something, they'd believe it and punish me. If I accused her, they wouldn't believe. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd still give her a lesser punishment and try to find a way to scold me in tandem. My birthday cake had to be a flavor she wanted. Hers did not, and my parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her a bit more than for me. We went to where she wanted, even if it was an event that should be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me, just used me as a punching bag. But at first she mostly ignored me. But then it got really bad when we were young teens. I'm not sure what the cause and effect are, but she found herself with no friends and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move? Did they ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close and my parents loved to boast about her achievements, but never ever mentioned any issues, whereas with me, they loved to bring out any flaws of mine constantly as teasing material. I only knew she had none because we went to the same school and I noticed her no longer walking around with people. Anyway, she had no friends. I did. I used to be decently popular. My sister realized that, and suddenly I stopped being the occasional punching bag to a hated person she needed to take down at all times. She started accusing me of more stuff. She accused my friends of more stuff. My parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone. The excuses ranging from, they're not good people according to your sister, to, why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time? What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of my family lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something I don't remember what, and I sadly replied I'm not allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self with no filter replied that it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. Well, that reached the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded as if I had anywhere to go for a month. But after that, they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. And my sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of extended family knowing her social status was bad, and she demanded to be changed. And my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. But she made friends on the new school. However, she never went back to the previous status quo of mostly ignoring me. I guess having felt the power of how badly she could screw with me, and anger that I told family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life was still bad. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never called friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them, or my sister would accuse them of taking stuff and they'd believe it. I did become close to my cousins though, since my parents never dared do any of that to family. And then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but my parents insisted. Well, at one point we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. By which he meant, she came over with skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes really badly, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different tale, that my BF had instead tried to flirt with her. But she naturally refused, since how could she do that to me? Guess who my parents believed? Now, my BF wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him. For a mean reason. But remember that back then I was a teen and suffering from the unfair bad treatment. I was very resentful and moody, and now hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were overweight, and since they liked showing love via food, giving you more food, buying treats, etc., my sister Wassie's also overweight, whereas I wasn't not. In fact, I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister even then was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand and my parents would deliver. Added to that the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model. Even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my BF would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard and the relationship ended. I did get another, but again my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that meant I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school, as I was fine with making out with boys and such but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was, and why couldn't I be like my sister and find myself someone like that? Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well. And the unequal treatment continued at this time. She had more spending money. Her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had. And when pointed out, they'd deny they ever said that or claim it was because I couldn't be trusted, like she was using my sister's accusations against my BF and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college. Not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got a B we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents, naturally, made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from her room or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict, etc. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and waiting until my sister finished uni to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills, and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no. That is, because they were so caring towards me, and I had such bad judgment. They would decide if a college was worth my getting in debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore, and never believed in my capabilities. Anyway, I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay it if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out. My friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did, because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. Not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school. But it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via parents, I put my achievement in social media at the same time I told them. Even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasting about it. And then I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy, but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them, and my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it, moved back home paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well. Almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people that say that if I was in X situation, I'd have done something? My husband is the type that really does. I'm the person that is meek and a doormat in any situation, and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person that can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy that claps back immediately. He loves drama, in that he loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just stewing something worse for revenge. He's the one that wanted me to post here, and wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled I got together with him. But just because I was incapable thanks to my upbringing probably of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't, and he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus, there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. Well, at this point my parents naturally demanded they meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse, but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went alone and excited to meet them, and came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful shit they wanted. Babe, we can fuck them over so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he, smartly, told me it was better to listen to him first or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding. On one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle on my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuses were that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister had at least the experience of it. On my venue, with pictures being taken, and the dress, and she'd have a cake later too, etc. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a ProRevenge instant karma nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife teehee, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that shit like some sort of great fucking gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole-ass catalog of insults about to spew out. But something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil, string these fucks along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife back then fiancé would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So, my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over this, from ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at danger of getting sued. So we eventually settled for the most benign plan. Act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be ProRevenge. The rest is all mostly my husband, but he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me, and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue and, not wanting family to fall apart, would be down to helping them do it. He pointed out I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public well, with our families there, but I'd be grateful to the help they gave, and that'd mollify me. He said my parents looked surprised, by my grown sister starting skipping with joy. Literally so, like a kid. So it was accepted. Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment in boyfriends in the past, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them lol. I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception, where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, and my husband and I were milking them. How? Well, rather than pay for the wedding then lay low, of course my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, the songs and color palette, my husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game. Or so they thought. What we did was thus. We'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out. Then sigh and say it's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options. Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with photographer. Flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other, tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes, then simply not using it, but my mom sent me a message about it, so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they really kept communications outside any text. We made sure that it happened by, when my sister tried messaging my husband, have me reply to here. This solidified the I'm controlling and neurotic claims my husband was making. So they believed it and never risked anything in writing. And maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. But I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painting as this controlling and dangerous bitch is extremely funny to me, and I egged him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor lol. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge. But he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus cost on our honeymoon, having this extravagant, expensive wedding and barely spending a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents, lol. I think my husband okay. He just confirmed I'm right lol was enjoying the whole tricking them more than planning our wedding lol. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents' sister husband had come up with was, wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place sister still lives with them even now, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress. Then said he had to go back to me as I was raging, and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security. A guy that looked like a bodyguard. We told him to not allow anyone my sister in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents got a text my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance, as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready. This because if my husband or bridesmaids etc. took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, as willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing, the doors open, and I come in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. And then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled something came up. There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied and in a teary voice said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandon me there. That the sister thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am, so I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and spread it. Then went, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point, my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better, joking my sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar, and don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did, lol. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while, with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character and started smiling lol. Well, what happened is, it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband, that I received afterwards. My sister did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in. Per our agreement, he claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police, since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it'd be too late and tried to demand he let my sister in. At this point, the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister and asking what was going on. Basically stalling. My mom soon came and eventually other people. At this point, the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now is damage control, as everyone that learned about it was aghast they'd try and pull it and screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret and threw my husband under the bus. At this point, my husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied. To quote him, "Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss lol." He denied having ever agreed to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was scream-crying and apparently sat on the floor, kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated why would he ever agree to something so fucked up. Tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding, and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get ripped apart by any and everyone that came out to check the drama was delicious. After years and years of being accused of stuff and not believed, to watch them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying. My dad kept changing from purple to white. My sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting on that my husband was in on it. But people kept asking why would my husband agree? Why was there no proof? Why did they want my sister to do this to my wedding? And they had no good answer to any of it. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. And maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says, All the expensive shit they were eating drinking certainly helps lol. We had a blast. My husband maintained the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before going to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing the three have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart thing, because my sister did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense. But the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months he wants to print, and put that on our wall lol, and hoped, but was also certain it had happened, that I'd get cheated on by him. She did also suggest he was cheating on me with her, actually. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages of my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to my family group chat, and sent screenshots of messages to him, where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the, "You're delusional, I never agreed to anything sh dick," and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message and said group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged family to help stop them from trying to ruin my honeymoon now that they had failed to ruin my wedding. Then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations, to avoid my parents sending my sister over, and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to fuck her in our honeymoon suite. Lol. My family assured him they'd take care of it. And indeed, since then we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new asshole. We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would prefer to have a normal loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I have wondered this all my life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled, so I quit trying. I've thought of many possibilities, but based on my observations I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect it to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after my sister's birth, and maybe didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late. So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. And they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help, so they resented me. But that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition. As in, they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it'd even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack, or else risk my sister turning on them. Summary, because it did get too long. Bad parents want to have my sister walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in wedding dress and all. My husband pretends to go along with it, and uses this as an excuse to get my parents to pay for the most expensive stuff possible for my wedding, which they only did because they thought it would be for my sister's sake. When the day comes though, we hired security that didn't let her in. When family called out my parents, they said my husband was in on it, but my husband denied it. There was no evidence, so no one believed them. So now family is against them. No one believes them. My sister didn't ruin my wedding, and we got a lot of money out of them.